What's up everybody, welcome back. So a new episode in the multiplayer series, and today I want to take a look at adding a vote to kick and a kick button. So I'm gonna do a little bit more explaining later, but first of all let's take a look how it's going to work pretty much. So I'm running this in the editor, and for that reason I needed to make a few small changes. So in a normal situation this wouldn't work for a local area network because we're using the Steam unique net ID to actually ban or kick players. And in a normal situation you also would not be able to vote for yourself or for the host, but I just enabled those to be able to demonstrate a little bit better how it works. So as clients we have vote buttons and we can vote for other players, and behind the button is the number with the current amount of votes, so those will update as soon as somebody presses the button for everybody. And then if we voted, the button is red, so we can see we casted the vote for that player, for example. Now the host has a kick button, so he can decide to actually kick a player. So for example, if I kick one of these guys, I can choose to kick him or ban him. So kicking is for the current session, and for the entire session the player will not be able to join, so only if you go back to the main menu and host a new game or close the game down, after that he will be able to rejoin. If we ban him permanently, then he cannot join again until we remove him from the ban list manually. So let's just kick this player, for example. You can see you have been kicked and then you will be removed from the server. As you can see, the votes from the player that has been kicked are also removed from the current votes. So we will keep track of who voted what, and if somebody leaves, all of those votes will be removed as well. And everything updates as it should. Now the host also has a kick and ban list section, and again this isn't working because I'm testing in the editor, but normally over here would be the names of the players that are banned, and you can select them and remove them from either the kick or the ban list if you want to. So that's what we're gonna do. This will probably take more than one episode, but we're gonna start working on it today. If you like the series, please consider leaving a like, and if you want to get the project file as a download, you can become a member of the YouTube channel or a Patreon, and then you will get access to the premium channels in the Discord and also downloads for the project. So yeah, let's start today's video. So before we actually dive into this, I want to do a little bit of explanation, and I would encourage you to listen to this because you may learn more from this than from the rest of the entire video, to be honest. So this feature has been requested quite a lot, and at first I didn't really want to do it, mostly because we're using the local save game and the listen server setup. So this is not the most useful feature to create ourselves an ad. And if you use something like PlayFab or some servers later, they will probably implement something that supports keeping track of a kick list and a ban list. So you would still have to implement that yourself, but they do kind of support stuff like that. But the reason I decided to do it after all is because this is actually a pretty interesting subject, and it tackles a lot of the basic replication stuff that we have been using throughout the entire series. And the series is kind of coming closer to an end. I still have a few things I want to do, but I also want to move on and start doing more component-based stuff that we can use to expand the project, but doesn't necessarily need the project as a base. So I decided to do it because it covers everything really nicely, and it's a great opportunity to go over everything again and make sure that everything is really clear. So we are using a lobby widget, and we want to change something on our own widget and then reflect it back on the widgets of all of the players connected to the game. And that will actually involve a lot of different replication that we want to use. But first of all, let me show you how a widget kind of works. So if I drag in this example, let's say we're playing a game. This is the character we are controlling. Our character is controlled by a player controller, and if we create a widget, that widget is owned by that player controller. So we can kind of see that, for example, if we are in a blueprint and we do something like create widget, then over here we need to fill in an owning player, and that's actually a player controller reference. And if we are in a widget and we do get owning player, then this will return a player controller again. So this kind of indicates that a widget and a player controller have some kind of relation. And for example, if I do get owning player pawn and look at the description, it says gets the owning player pawn that's owned by the player controller assigned to the widget. So again, the player controller actually owns the widget, and the player controller also owns the character. So you obviously can get a reference to your pawn in here, but a player controller owns a widget and they actually only exist for that player controller. So that takes me back to this example. So this is a single player game, but what if we expand this to a multiplayer game? So on the right side we have 3 clients, and on the left side we have the host. So this is a listen server model. And you can see everybody has its own character and its own player controller, and those are in their own colors. And the widgets, I gave those a different color because those are not instances of each other. So for example, we have the player controllers here, all of the capsules, and each client has a version of its own player controller, and the host actually has a version of all the player controllers in the game, so for each client, and also one of his own. So the player controller of the host only exists on the server, or the host, and the player controllers of the clients exist both on the local player and on the host. So there's 2 instances of a client's player controller in a multiplayer game, and there's 1 instance of a host player controller in a multiplayer game. But as I mentioned, these are instances of each other, so I can replicate between those. But these widgets have nothing to do with each other. So although they are the same color, they don't exist. I cannot replicate from this widget to this widget. This widget only exists for this player controller, and if I want to do something from this widget, I need to do it from this player controller or possibly from this character. But as I explained in the beginning, a player controller owns the widget, so it's the closest reference to actually getting somewhere. So what we want to do, for example, if we are this client and we cast a vote to another client, we want to update our own lobby, but we also want the lobbies for all of the other clients and the host to update. So if we are on this widget and we click a button, then we need to go to the owning client's player controller, which is this one. And then we can replicate, and replication always goes between different instances of the same actor. So this means I can only replicate to other instances of this player controller. I cannot replicate from a player controller to a pawn, for example, or from a player controller to the GameMode, for example. That doesn't work. Replication always goes between different instances of the same actor. So I can replicate from the owning client's player controller to the server player controller over here, and then I'm suddenly on the server instance of the game. So when I'm the server, we also have access to the game mode, which is represented by this cube over here. There's only 1 instance of the game mode, just like the server player controller, for example. It only exists on the server. And so again, for that reason, you can never use replicated events on the game mode. I mean, you can place them in there, but they will not do anything. There's only 1 instance of the game mode. Replication always goes between different instances of the same actor, and those don't exist. So replication on the game mode doesn't work. Just a little side note. So we are on the server player controller, then we can tell the server game mode we changed something. Then the server game mode has an array of all of the player controllers on the server, so then he can tell all the server player controllers to replicate to the owning client controllers again. So it will go back to all of these controllers. And from the owning client controllers, we can actually access our lobby widgets again, because those are owned by the local controllers. So it's a pretty interesting setup, because we have to go from a local controller to the host controller to the game mode, back to the server controllers, and then back to the owning client. So that's always a thing when you're working with widgets, you have to go through the owning client. So that's a little bit of explanation what we're gonna do in a visual representation. For me, this always worked a lot better than just using words. So I hope this makes sense to you. And I think from here, we're simply gonna start, and along the way, I'll try and do a little bit more explaining. I want to start by creating an interface. So we're going to add a button to the player names in the lobby, and those are a widget over here, the lobby player name row. And if we click that button, we want something to happen inside of our lobby menu. So to make the connection between those, I'm going to use an interface instead of a hard reference. Something I have not been doing a lot in this tutorial, and is a recommended practice to avoid making too many hard references and also creating endless reference chains. So to make this connection, we're going to set up an interface. So let's create it inside of our interfaces folder, inside the framework folder. And I'm going to right click, go to blueprints, and create a blueprint interface. Let's call this BPI widget blueprint lobby menu, for example. So what I usually do, if I use a lot of interfaces, is simply name the interface after the actor that I'm going to implement it in, and only implement functions that I'm going to use for that actor in that interface. And that way I'm going to keep things a little bit separated and not end up with one interface with 100 calls inside of it. So inside of this lobby menu interface, we're going to add one function, and let's call this BPI lobby, and then kick button pressed. And we want to give this an input, and that's the index of this button. So let's call this index and turn it into an integer. And I think that should be all. Yeah, that's all we need to do in here. So we can close the interface and we can implement it later. First of all, let's go back to our widgets folder and let's add the button to our player name row. So the lobby player name row widget. Let's open this one up. In the designer, inside of the horizontal box, we're going to add a button on the right side, and that's going to be the vote and kick button. So let's simply drag in a button inside of our horizontal box. And then for the alignment of the button, we can set it to fill. And then align it to the right horizontally and vertically to the center. Inside of this button, we want to put some text. So we can pretty much copy this text over here, because we're going to make it a variable anyway. So let's right click and copy, and then paste it on top of the button. So this is going to be the text for our kick button. So let's call this button kick. And then we're going to change the text in here. So with the text selected, let's call this kick. And then I'm going to do an open bracket, 0 close bracket. So that's going to be the amount of votes. Now, because we copied this text, it has a minimum desired width. So I'm going to get rid of this one, and it will shrink the button down. So this should pretty much do. We can decrease the font a little bit maybe, but we don't want to make it too small probably. Let's do something like 16, and that should work. So we're going to rename the button as well, so we know what we're dealing with. So that's our kick button. And now we should be good to go. And we can set up stuff in our graph. First of all, let's add 2 new variables that we need. So we want a reference to our lobby menu. So that's our widget blueprint lobby menu. But instead of making this a hard reference to our actual lobby menu, like I mentioned, we're just going to use the user widget class. So that's the That's the base class of a widget, like an actor is the base class of most of the actors that we put in the level. So this is pretty much the lightest reference that we can keep to a widget. And we also want the index of this button in here, so we're simply going to add the button index, and that's going to be an integer. So those are the variables, and we want to set up a few events as well. So let's go to the event graph. First of all, we're going to create an event to change the color of the button if we pressed it, so we can see we voted for this player. So let's create a custom event, and this is going to be set vote button style. Set vote button style. So I'm simply going to change the text for the button, and we want to know if the vote was true or false. So we're going to add an input in here, and that says is vote true. So that's a boolean. And then we can grab the text of our kick button. Or no, we can grab the kick button. Let's grab the kick button and drag off here, and we're going to do set color and opacity. Yeah, we can do that for the button. Okay, I'm sorry. So set color and opacity for the button, and then we can drag off the color over here, and we can simply select one to make it a little bit easier. So we can plug in the boolean into the wildcard over here, and then we can simply specify a false and true. So if I voted for this player, then the vote is true, so then I want it to be red, and if I didn't vote, I'm simply going to make the text white. So false is going to be white and true is going to be red. Like so. Then we want an on-clicked event for our kick button. So let's go to our kick button over here, and we're going to add an on-clicked event. So for this one, we're going to use our interface. So we're going to grab the lobby menu reference that we have over here. And then we're going to call our BPI lobby menu kick button pressed, the message from the interface. Plug it in, and we also want to plug in the index of the button that we pressed. So we can handle this later on the lobby menu. And there's one last event that we're going to add in here, and that's going to update the amount of votes. So let's create a custom event again and call this set vote amount. So for this one, we also need an input, and that's going to be the amount of votes. So that's an integer. And this time we can grab the text for the button. So let's go to text button kick. And we want to set the text. So let's look for a set text node, plug that in over here. And in this case, we also want to know if we are the host or a client, because for the host, we're going to change the text into kick, and for clients, it's going to say vote. So we can drag off the text again and look for a select node. And this time we're going to plug in an isServer boolean into the wildcard. So let's look for isServer. Plug it into the wildcard over here. And then we can make a text again. So we can drag off here and do a format text, for example. So if we are not the server, the button is going to say vote. And then I'm going to say an open bracket, so a normal bracket, then a curly open bracket, a curly close bracket, and then a normal close bracket. So we end up with a as a variable, and we can plug in the amount over here. And if we are the host, then we want to do the same thing, but say kick instead. So let's copy and paste it and change the text over here to kick. And also plug in the integer like so. Okay, so we have a few events to update the button and the values in here, so this should be good to go. Now we can take a look at the lobby menu to implement it in there. So let's open our lobby menu and go to the graph. First of all, again, we're gonna add a few variables that we need. So let's go to the variable list. The first one is a bool, and that's going to be is LAN connection. So we're only going to make this work if we're not using a LAN connection. So you probably know what players are on your local area network, and we can only ban them by their name if we don't have a unique net ID, so they can just make a new name and then they can join anyway. So it doesn't really work for local area network. That's why we're adding this. This is going to be instance editable and exposed on spawn. So make sure we enable those for the boolean. And then we're going to need 2 arrays. So let's add a new variable again. Oh freaking really. And this is going to be the array with the kick vote count. So let's call this kick vote count. And it's going to be an array of integers. So this array will hold all the amount of votes for each player. And then we're going to add a second array. And this array is my votes. And this is an array of booleans. Oh, sorry. And this actually holds my votes. So for each player in the game, it's true if I voted for that player index. So these are my votes, and these are all of the votes of all players added together and stored in a number. So those are the 2 different arrays that we have in here. To make this work, we want to make a change to our update player names function. So we're going to go to update player names. And in here, we are creating the player name row widgets where we added the button. So for those widgets, we want to do a little bit of extra setup. And we need the return value from this node over here. So from the create node, we're going to drag off, and we want to do the setup for the variables that we added on there. I'm sorry, got distracted from my notes. So we're going to drag off here, and what we want to do is set the visibility for our kick button. So let's get the button kick. Oop. And we want to drag off the button kick and set the visibility. So we're going to collapse the button in a few different cases. So let's set this to collapsed. And then we're going to grab a branch in here, plug it into the end. So first of all, we're going to collapse the kick button for ourselves. So we can grab the player name that comes from the for each loop where we break the structure. We can compare this. So look for a triple equal. And we have the player name of ourselves stored over here in the variables, my player name. So we're going to plug this in. So we're not going to create a kick button for ourselves or a vote button. And we're going to put an OR bool over here. No, not the XOR, but normal OR boolean. So this one. Oh, freaking. Thank you, this one. So normal OR. And we want to add 2 more conditions over here. So we're also not going to create the kick button in a solo game, and we have a boolean for that already in here. So if we look through the variables, is solo game, we can simply plug it in directly. Then we're also going to use our LAN connection, so plug that one in as well. And the last one where we don't want to create a kick button for the host. So in that case, we can drag off the array index over here from the for each loop and simply compare that. So if the index is 0, that's the first player controller, so that's going to be the host. So in those 4 cases, we don't want the button in here. That's going to be the condition. If those are true, we're going to collapse the kick button. If those are false, then we need to do a little bit of setup. So then we want to drag off the return value from the create widget node again. And first of all, we want to set the reference to the lobby menu. So drag off here and set our lobby menu. So that's a reference to ourselves. So we can drag off here and do self. So this is the user widget reference, and we can simply plug in ourselves. That works. So that will avoid creating the hard reference that I mentioned earlier in the video. Then we need to set the button index. So let's drag off here again and set the button index. So that's the same index as the player controller from the game mode. So we can drag that off here and plug it into the array index over here from the for each loop. Then we want to set the vote button style. So in case a player leaves or someone joins the lobby, we are recreating the player names. So we want to make sure that we update the style of the button, so the color, to our current votes. So we want to drag off the return value again, and we're going to set the vote button style. And then we can grab our array of my votes, and we want to get a copy from here, and then simply get the copy from the array index. So that's the vote that I casted for this player, and we can plug that in there. So plug it into the array index of the for each loop. And then the last thing we want to do is update the vote amount as well. So again, drag off the return value and set the vote amount. Plug it in here. And for this one, we can do the same thing, but with the kick vote count array. So drag it in, get a copy, plug it in over here, and again, grab the index from the for each loop. And that should return the correct value. Okay, so this will actually make things work for the player names that are populated by a player. And then we also have our update player amounts function over here. And this will actually fill in the empty spots with the player name row widget, but then it will say waiting for player. So for these ones, we also want to make sure that we don't have the kick button enabled, because there's not actually a player in that spot. So again, we're going to drag off the return value over here and then get our kick button. So get button kick. And we're simply going to set it to collapsed over here. So set visibility. And by the way, no, we are probably better off setting it to hidden. So that way, if the button is there or not, it will still take a place. So the all of the names will still align. So we're going to set it to hidden over here and do the same thing in the update player names. Instead of setting it to collapsed, we're going to set it to hidden over here as well. So that's just for the alignment. That should look a bit better. Okay, so we have the existing functions updated. Now we also want to create two functions to update our kick votes and to update the my votes array. So let's create a new function over here. And let's call the first one update kick votes. So these are the functions that will be called from the owning player controller back to the lobby to update everything. So this is going to have an input, and that's an array with the vote counts. So let's call this the kick vote count, for example. So that's an array of integers. And we already have an array of integers on here. So what we want to do is, first of all, check if the length of the array changed. So we're going to grab our kick vote count array, and we're going to drag off here and get the length. And we also want to get the length of the new array that we are plugging into the function over here. And if the new array is smaller than the existing array, so if a player left, then we don't immediately want to update everything. So let's add a branch in here, and I'm going to explain why. So plug it in over here. So if this is true, if a player left, then we're simply only going to update the array with the new values, like so. And in an other case, so if no player left, if we only change the amount of votes, then we're also going to update the array, but after that we're going to update the vote counts on the buttons as well. The reason we're not doing that over here is because the array for the kick vote counts will not be in sync yet with the array for the player name widgets. So there's an unequal amount of indexes in there and it won't match up. If we actually remove a player from the lobby, then this will be called, and right after that the update player names will be called automatically because a player left, and that will make sure that the settings for the kick vote counts will be updated automatically. So in this case we don't need to worry about it, and it will also mess things up if we do it right here. So if no player left, we can immediately update them, because then this function will not be called afterwards. So then we can simply grab the array of player names. So that's already present in our lobby. We created that previously. We can get a copy from here and simply get the index. No, we want to get the array index, sorry, not the array element, and then drag off here and do set vote amount. And the amount is the actual array element, so we can plug that in over here. And this will update the vote amounts if a player voted. So that's good to go. Compile and save. And then we also want to create a function to update our own votes. So let's call this update my votes. And this will need an input with an array of booleans. So let's create an input and call this my votes, for example, and turn it into an array of bools. So we only need to update this array for the player that actually voted, so he can update his own buttons, and we're later going to store this array on the game mode as well. So for each player we have an array with their votes, and if a player leaves or gets kicked, we can make sure that we remove the votes that he casted. But first of all, let's make sure we update the widget with the votes for myself. So we can drag in the my votes array in here and simply set it to the new value. And then in this case, we're going to add a second boolean to kind of do what we did with the size of the array in the previous function. So we're going to call this boolean update buttons and turn it into a single variable. So we can simply set it true or false if we want to update the buttons, or make sure that it's been updated later by the player name update function. So if this is true, we want to grab a for each loop and then loop through our array of my votes. And for each one, we're going to get the corresponding player name widget. So we can drag that in and get a copy. Simply get the array index, and then on here set the vote button style and plug in the array element. So that should be good to go. And now with this boolean we can determine if we only update the array or update the buttons immediately as well. Okay, so this should be the first setup that we need in our lobby menu. Now we can go into our menu controller quickly and set up the replicated events to update these values. So let's go to the framework folder and open our menu controller. So because we're in the lobby, we're still using the menu controller and not the shooter player controller. And in here we want to create two custom events. So let's create with the first one. This is going to be lobby update kick votes. So lobby update kick votes. This is going to run on the owning client. So we're going to use this event to call from the server back to the owning client, so the clients can update their lobbies. This is going to need an input, and that's the array of kick votes. So the kick vote count. And that's the array of integers. Like so. And then we can simply grab our lobby menu over here. Let's make sure it's valid. Why not? And if it's valid, we're gonna drag off and call our update kick votes function that we just created. And simply pass on the array over here. So that's to update the kick vote counts, and we want to do the same thing for the my votes array. So we're also going to create a custom event for that one, and that's lobby update my votes. Close. So again, we want this, okay. We want this to replicate on the owning client, and we're gonna grab our lobby menu, make sure it's valid. And in this case, we're gonna call update my votes. And again, we want to pass on the variables. So plug in the isValid pin and we can drag them onto the event to create them as well. So that should be good to go. And we have the events to be able to call from the game mode. So now we want to take a look at setting up things in our menu game mode. Let's open our menu game mode. First of all, we want to add variables in here so we can keep track of the votes. So we're going to start with the array that keep track of the count. So that's the kick vote count. And that's simply an array of integers. So that's not too bad. There we go. And now we also want to keep track of each vote for each player that he casted for other players. So in other words, we need to keep an array of votes for each player, and the players are also an array, so we need an array of arrays. And the only way we can do that in Blueprints is by using a structure. So in C++ you can basically create multi-dimensional arrays, but in Blueprints we have to create a structure to be able to do that. So we're going to go back to the framework folder. I'm going to right click, go to Blueprints and create a new structure. Let's call this structure player kick votes, for example, and open it up. Now all we want to do in here is add an array of booleans. So this is going to be my votes, and then it's an array of booleans. And now we can save the structure, and if we create an array of that structure, then we have an array of arrays. So we want to go to the variables in the game mode, create a new array, and that's going to be the players kick votes. And we're going to turn this into an array of our player kick votes structures. So player kick votes. And make sure it's an array. So now we can keep track of the votes for each player that they casted. So the first thing we're going to do is do the basic setup for this, and we want to do that inside of our event handle starting new player. So that's over here, the first event that fires if a controller enters the game and the game mode. And in here we are creating the arrays for the player ready and the team IDs. So we want to do the same thing for our kick vote count and player kick votes. We want to add an entry in these arrays for all players that join the lobby. So let's make a little bit of room over here. And then we can simply grab the set array element node and copy it twice. And we're going to set an array element in the kick vote count array and in the player kick votes array. So make sure we hook everything up over here. And the index comes from the add node, so that will make sure that all of the arrays match up. And then for the kick vote count array, let me grab my notes quickly. We don't actually need to put in an item, we can leave it to 0, that's fine. And for the player kick votes, we want to drag off here and make a structure, so make an S player kick votes, and then drag off the array and also make an array. And we can keep it empty for now, that's fine. As long as we have something hooked up, then it won't complain. So that's when a player enters the lobby. Then we also want to make sure if a player logs out, we remove these indexes from the arrays. So we want to go to event logout, on logout over here. And we're doing the same thing already. So we want to make sure that we remove the indexes from the arrays, and we want to do it before we remove the controller from the controller index array, otherwise we can't find it, so we don't know the correct index. So make sure we move this to the right, and first we're going to remove the kick vote count array and the player kick votes array index, and make sure you remove the controller last from the all connected controllers array. So copy the remove node twice and hook it up over here. So there is actually more that we need to do if a player logs out, but for now we want to make sure we have these basic things hooked up so we can't forget them. So those are the indexes if a player leaves. And then there is one thing that we want to do right now, and that's add a boolean to our update lobby event over here, so we can also update the votes. So let's create a branch over here and drag it onto the event, onto an empty spot, so it will create a new bool. And we're gonna call this the update kick votes. Let me double check so I'm not messing things up later if I'm looking at my notes. Let's call this simply kick votes. So this simply tells if we want to update the kick votes if we call the update lobby event. And then if we do, we want to drag off the array element over here and call our lobby update kick vote. So not update my votes, but update kick votes. We want to hook that up to the true pin. Nope. And we can simply plug in the kick vote count array over here. Now we do want to make sure that we hook this up the first thing after the array, after the for each loop. So before we update the player names, we want to update our kick votes. So we need to make sure we add this before we update the player names. That's pretty important. So we could disconnect the loop body and simply start with the branch that checks for the kick votes. If this is false, we're going to continue to the player names branch immediately. Otherwise, update the kick votes and then continue to the player names branch. So that's important. Make sure it's hooked up before you update the player names. Don't hook it up all the way at the end, because then it won't work. Okay, so that's set up and good to go. And now we want to create a function in here that we can call if a player votes. So we're going to create a new function and call this player kick vote. And in here we do want to put in inputs. So we're going to put in the index for the player that we voted for. So that's our vote index. That's an integer. And we also want a reference to a controller in here. So we're going to add a controller. And we're actually going to use our menu controller class. So look for menu controller and plug that in over here. So if we vote for somebody, then the first thing we want to do is update our own kick votes. So we're going to do that one first. And to do that, we need to get the correct index of our vote in the votes array. So we're going to grab all of the connected player controllers. We're going to drag off here and we're going to find an item. We want to find the controller over here, so then we know the correct index. And we can get the player kick votes array to get the corresponding index for that. When we have that, we can drag off here and break the structure. So this will give us the array for the with the votes of that player. We're going to store this in a local variable because this is inside of a structure and we want to change things inside of the array. So that's just a little bit easier. Call this local player votes, for example. So we have that one stored. First of all, we want to make sure that we actually have a valid index for that player in here. So we created the array in here that's just empty. So we're going to grab a branch, plug it in here. Then we're going to grab our local player votes array, drag off here and check for a valid index. So is valid index. And plug in the player that we voted for. That comes from the input. So that's the condition over here. If it's not a valid index, then we want to use the set array element node. So then we can drag the player the local player votes array and set an array element. Plug it into the false bin. We're gonna set the item to true. So this is the first time that we voted for this player. So it has to be true in this case. We're gonna enable size to fit. So it will create the index. And we want to plug in the index from the actual event over here. Function, sorry. And if we already have the index, then we're also going to use the set array element node, so we can copy and paste it over here. But in this case, we want to get the current value and flip it around. So we're going to grab the local array and get a copy. And we want to get the copy from the index, so the vote index over here. And then simply grab a not boolean to flip the result around. So if we voted false, then now it's going to be true, and if it was true, it's going to be false. We don't really need size to fit in here, but it doesn't really matter, and we can plug in the vote index again from the function. So after we did that, we need to make sure that we update the vote counts as well. So we can get the current value inside of the array again. Make sure we plug in the index. Oh, damn it, my mouse again. So we can hook this up to a branch. Like so. So make sure you plug in both of the branches over here. And we can simply determine if we want to add or subtract the vote. So if this is true, we're going to add a vote. So we're going to grab our kick vote count array. We're going to drag off here and we're going to get, but this time we're going to get a reference. And the difference is if we drag off a reference and do increment integer, then this will actually change the value inside of the array directly and we don't have to save it. If we drag off here and do get a copy and plug that one into the increment integer, then we need to save the array after that manually because it didn't update. So that's the difference between a reference and a copy, and in this case we want to grab a reference. So this goes into the true bin. Again, the index just comes from the function over here. And if this is false, we're going to subtract. So we're going to decrement int and then plug that in over here. So that will update the counts. And now all we need to do is make sure that the player that voted has his vote button colors updated. So that's only for the actual player that pressed the button. So for that one, we can drag off our menu controller over here and then call our lobby update my votes. Oh. So make sure we hook up both of the branches again. And over here, we can plug in the local player vote. And we want to update the buttons because things changed for this player. So we're going to enable the boolean to update the buttons. And after that, we want to update the array of structures on the game mode as well. So we're going to grab our player kick votes array. We're going to set an array element. So currently we only changed it in a local array. So we want to store that inside of the player kick votes array. So we can drag off here and make a structure. And then simply plug in the local array over here. Make sure we enable size to fit. And grab the index from the function again, like so. And the very last thing we want to do in here is call our update lobby event. And for the update lobby, we want to make sure that we update the vote counts for all players. So that's why we need to enable the kick votes boolean over here. Okay, so this should be good to go. And this is the function that will be called if a player presses a button to vote. So we want to go inside of our menu controller now to actually make that connection. So this time we want to create a custom event inside of our menu controller. This is going to be player kick vote, for example. Oh, freaking caps lock. Kick vote. There we go. So this one is not going to run on the owning client, but this is for the communication the other way around. So this is going to run on the server. This will be called by the owning client if he presses the button and then tell the game mode, so the server, to change things. So in here we want to grab the input, and that's the vote index. That's an integer but not an array, a single variable. And then we want to get our game mode. We're gonna cast to our menu game mode. So I mentioned not using too many hard references. In this case, we already have a ton of references to our menu game mode in here, so it doesn't really matter if we add it. If we want to get rid of it, we need to get rid of all of the references. So in this case, I'm not going to worry about it too much. And in here, we want to call our player kick vote function that we just created. So do it like this. We can pass on the vote index, and the controller is a reference to ourselves. So we can plug that one in directly. Okay, so this is the event on the player controller to actually talk to the server side. So we have that one done as well. Now I think we want to go back to the lobby menu and tie some things together. Let's open the lobby menu, and we want to do a little bit of work in the designer as well, unfortunately. Not my favorite part, but okay. So we want to create a pop-up in here if the host presses the kick button. Are you sure? Do you want to ban him permanently? Things like that. So I'm going to use the border for the game mode options in here, and I'm simply going to duplicate it. And first of all, let me hide the original one so it doesn't get too confusing. And then I'm going to align the new one again. So we want to set the alignment to 0.5, that's good, and then mess around with the position a little bit. So this should be 0, and then we can move it up a little. So minus 150 maybe, minus 175, that's fine. So first of all, let's rename this. This is going to be my border pop-up kick player. Nope. So rename it border pop-up kick player. And in here I want to get rid of some stuff but also keep some stuff. So let me see. The first vertical box, we're going to keep it. Then I'm going to get rid of most of the horizontal boxes. So the first one, so all of these with the drop down menus, I want to get rid of those. So I'm simply going to delete them, delete and delete. The number of teams also deleted. Then the border auto assign with the checkbox is the one I want to keep, so I'm not going to delete that one. And then below that we have the accept button. I'm also going to keep that one, but I'm going to right click it, wrap with a horizontal box, and then duplicate the button, so we have two buttons in here. And then the first one is going to be button kick cancel. So if we decide we don't want to kick. And the second one is going to be kick accept. Like so. So let's change the text on the button as well. So this is cancel, and we want to align this to the left side. Oh, this is the text, I'm sorry. So don't mess with the text alignment. Cancel accept. So then select the button, and we're going to align the button to the right side, set it to fill, and grab the other button, set it to fill, align it to the left side, grab the horizontal box and set it to fill horizontally. So that will spread out the buttons. For the checkbox, this is going to be for banning permanently. So I'm going to change the text over here to ban permanently. Permanently. Yeah, that looks kind of okay. So this is going to be checkbox ban. And then we have a border over here that doesn't really need to be a variable, so we can disable that one so it's not too confusing. And then all we want to do in here is add a border with some text. So I'm gonna grab a border and drop it on top of the vertical box in here. So now we want to move that border all the way up. And inside of that border, I want to drop some text. So let me grab a text that's not a variable. This one, for example, I'm going to copy it and then paste it inside of the new border. Where did the player name come from? Okay, so I copied some. That's pretty weird. I am inside of the correct border, vertical box, vert box, player names. How does this end up in here? And now it's gone. Okay. So is my vertical box player names still there? No, it's not. Okay. So something messed up. I'm gonna press Ctrl Z. So here is my vertical box player names again. Oh, I grabbed the wrong border when moving it. Oh, this stuff is so confusing. So make sure you grab the border that you just created and move that one up all the way to the top of the vertical box. So that's at top over here. I accidentally grabbed the border with the vert box player names, so you don't want to do that. Inside of this border, we want to add some text. Make this border black so we can actually see the text. So that's my brush color, and then set it to black alpha 0.5. Grab the text over here, and this is actually going to say kick player question mark, kicked players cannot rejoin this session. So just a little description. So I'm going to copy this from my example project, paste it in here. So this is the text, and I'm also going to make sure that this text is a variable. So let's call this text kick description, and make sure it's a variable on the top right over here. Okay, so I think that should be the awesome designer part. That should be good to go. So we can grab this button border and make it a bit smaller, so it's a bit better aligned. And by default, this border should be hidden, but if you used the GameMode border, then that should be good to go. So let's compile and save. And now we want to go into the graph because we still need to add the interface that we created at the beginning of the series. So let's start by doing that. We're going to go into the class settings, and then over here for the implemented interfaces, we're going to add our BPI widget blueprint lobby menu interface. Then we can go to the list over here. Oh, for some reason it didn't add it. Okay, so the lobby interface. What? Oh, it did add it. So why is it not in here? Freaking really Unreal. Why are you doing this to me? Let's reopen the blueprint and maybe it's in here now. What the actual? Implemented namespace, implemented interface, BPI lobby menu, and oh, maybe because I didn't compile the interface, would that have been the problem? Okay, perhaps this was on my end. So make sure the interface is compiled and saved, and then the function should pop up. So now we can double click it and implement it over here. And what do we want to do? So now I lost my notes, obviously. So first of all, we're going to check if we are the server or a client, because we want to take a different approach if we press the kick or the vote button. So we're going to add a branch in here and check if we are the server. And if we are a client, then we want to grab our menu controller. So we need to get our owning player. And we're going to cast it to our menu controller. So this goes into the false bin. We're not the host, we're a client. And then we're going to call our player kick vote event on the controller, so player kick vote, and that's the one that replicates to the server to update the game mode. So we want to pass on the vote index, and that should be good to go. So we have that one set up, and then for the host, we want to actually make sure that we store this index in a variable so we can use it later. So if the host presses the kick button, then first we're going to show the pop-up window. And because of that reason, we need to make sure that we keep track of the index that we pressed. So we're going to add a new variable, and that's going to be the host player to kick. And that's going to be an integer. So the first thing we're going to do over here, if we are the host, is actually set the variable. Then we're going to grab our border pop-up kick player. We're going to drag it in and set the visibility. So we want to make sure that the border is visible. And then we also want to make sure that we cannot press a whole bunch of other buttons. So we actually have an event in here that's called disable lobby, and that's not an event, that's a function. And we can call it over here. This will disable all of the other buttons on the lobby. And after that, we want to update the color of the kick vote button. So if the host pressed kick, the button is going to be red for a while as well. So we can actually grab our player name widgets and then drag off here and get a copy. So in this case, we want to get a copy of the host player to kick index. And then for this one, we're going to drag off and simply set the vote button style and set it to true manually. So that will make sure the button turns red. Okay, so that should be good to go. Now what we do want to do is double click this disable lobby event. And we're going to turn this into an input. So we can also use this function, not event, to enable the lobby again as well. So make sure you do that so we have it in place for later. Let's compile and save. And I think for now we can perform a small test and then we can stop for today because the episode is going to be quite long and we're not done. So we actually have quite a bit of work left to do. So I'm going to cut it off here today and then we're going to continue in the next episode. Okay, so I did a quick test and there is one thing that I messed up. So we want to go to the framework folder and open our menu game mode. Inside of the player kick vote, I want to hook up this index to another index. So at the end where we set the player kick votes array, this index should come from the find node over here and not from the vote index of the actual function. So there's actually two connections to the find node. One goes to the getter for the player kick votes and the other one goes back all the way at the end to the same kick votes array where we set the index. So make sure you change that one. Then we also want to go inside of the menu controller, and you don't have to do this, but I'm going to set these events to reliable. We are in a lobby menu, we are not in a gameplay level with all sorts of explosions and I don't know what kinds of other stuff going on, and this is not an SMG that's firing 15 rounds a second. So it shouldn't make too much of an impact if we set these to reliable, and in that case we actually know the voting is reliable. So make sure we enable reliability in the menu controller. And the last thing we want to do to make testing a little bit easier is go to the lobby menu, update player names, and in here for the OR boolean we can simply disconnect everything except the solo game. So that way we can test in editor a little bit easier and we can also test with local area network. Okay, so with all of that stuff set up, let's run a little test. I'm gonna run it with 3 players and when I have the lobby going, I'll be back. So inside of my 3-player lobby, this might not be the smoothest experience because I'm also recording, but Let's see what happens. So we can vote for other players, and then our button turns red after we voted, and the amount updates for other players. So that's good. For the host it says kick, for the clients it says vote, so that's good as well. And if we vote again, then our text turns white again and the vote gets removed. So I think this part should be pretty good. Everything is updating as it should. Now if the host actually presses the kick button, we do get the pop-up, but from here we are stuck. We didn't set up the actual buttons for cancel and accept, so we cannot continue after this point. But we should at least have the colors and the numbers updating, and that part should be working. So it's been a pretty long video already, so I'm gonna cut it off here today, and we're gonna finish this off in the next episode. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and I'll be back soon for more. Later guys and girls, bye bye.